The 42nd floor of Meridian Corporate Tower buzzed with the controlled chaos of high-stakes business. Glass offices reflecting the city lights as executives moved through their evening routines. At the security desk near the elevators, Marcus Coleman sat with practiced invisibility, his weathered hands resting casually on the console as his dark eyes tracked every movement with the precision of someone trained to see what others missed. At 55, Marcus carried himself with the steady composure of a man who had learned patience through decades of waiting for the right moment. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, security uniform pressed and professional, but there was something in his posture that suggested depths beneath the surface. To the executives hurrying past his desk, he was furniture necessary, but unremarkable, a fixture they had grown so accustomed to that they spoke freely in his presence as if he were invisible. Marcus had been working the night shift at Meridian for 3 years, a job he had taken after what everyone assumed was early retirement from some mundane government position. His references were impeccable, his background check clean, and his demeanor so perfectly ordinary that no one had thought to look deeper. He arrived at 6 every evening, monitored the security feeds, signed in visitors, and locked up the building. At midnight, he was reliable, quiet, and forgettable, exactly what he needed to be. Tonight, like every night for the past month, Marcus watched as the same group of executives gathered in the conference room at the end of the hall. Through the glass walls, he could see them huddled around the mahogany table, their voices low and their expressions serious. They thought the soundproof glass protected their conversations. But Marcus had been in surveillance long enough to know that security systems were only as secure as the people who installed them. The group consisted of 5 men who, collectively, controlled billions in corporate assets and government contracts. There was Richard Blackstone, the company's chief financial officer, a thin man with sharp features and sharper business practices. Beside him sat Jonathan Hayes, vice president of operations, whose nervous energy and darting eyes suggested someone constantly looking over his shoulder. The third man, Michael Torres, served as the company's liaison with government agencies, his political connections worth more than his salary suggested. David Chen, the head of procurement, handled the company's massive supply contracts with a precision that had made him wealthy beyond his official means. Finally, there was Robert Manning, the company's legal counsel, whose job was to ensure that whatever they were planning stayed within the gray areas of the law. Marcus had spent months studying these men, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, and their tells. He knew that Blackstone bit his lip when he was nervous, that Hayes always loosened his tie during stressful conversations, and that Torres had a habit of checking his phone obsessively when discussing sensitive matters. These were details that might seem insignificant to casual observers, but Marcus understood that in his line of work, details were everything. As the meeting progressed, Marcus made subtle adjustments to his security console, ostensibly checking system status, but actually ensuring that every camera angle was optimized and every recording device was functioning properly. The executives had grown so comfortable with his presence that they had forgotten the first rule of sensitive conversations. Never discuss illegal activities where the security guard can hear you. The Meridian Corporate Tower had been Marcus's hunting ground for exactly 1,095 days. He knew because he had been counting, marking each day as another step closer to the moment when 3 years of careful observation would finally pay off. Tonight felt different, charged with the kind of tension that preceded significant revelations. From his position at the security desk, Marcus watched as the 5 executives concluded their meeting with the kind of handshakes and satisfied nods that suggested they had reached an important decision. As they filed out of the conference room, their conversation continued in the hallway, their voices carrying in the way that powerful men's voices always did when they believed they were among allies. "The shipment arrives Thursday," Torres was saying to Chen, his voice low, but not quite low enough. "Our contact at the port has everything arranged. No inspections, no delays." Chen nodded, adjusting his expensive watch. "And the documentation?" "Clean as always," Manning interjected, his legal training evident in his careful word choice. "Plausible deniability on all fronts?" Marcus continued his apparent focus on the security monitors, but every word was being absorbed and cataloged. His expression remained neutral, professional, exactly what one would expect from a security guard, whose only concern was making sure the building stayed safe through the night. Blackstone paused near Marcus's desk, pulling out his phone to check. A message. "Evening, Marcus," he said absently, the kind of perfunctory greeting one gives to service personnel. "Evening, Mr. Blackstone," Marcus replied with the appropriate level of deference. "Working late again?" "You know how it is," Blackstone said with a tired smile. "Business never sleeps." He glanced at his phone again, frowning. "We're expecting some important deliveries this week. I want to make sure security is tight." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I'll keep an eye on everything, sir. Nothing gets past this desk." If Blackstone had been listening more carefully, he might have caught the double meaning in those words. But like his colleagues, he saw only what he expected to see, a dedicated employee doing his job. As the executives moved toward the elevators, their conversation shifted to safer topics: weekend plans, stock prices, the upcoming company retreat. But Marcus had heard enough for tonight. The Thursday shipment Torres had mentioned wasn't the first they had discussed in his presence, and the pattern he had been tracking for months was finally becoming clear. After the executives left, Marcus remained at his desk for another hour, methodically reviewing the evening's security footage and ensuring that all systems were functioning normally. To any observer, he was simply completing his routine duties. In reality, he was checking that every camera angle from the evening had been properly recorded and that the audio pickups he had strategically placed months earlier had captured every word of the executives' conversations at midnight. Marcus locked up the building with his usual thoroughness, checking every door and window, setting the overnight security systems, and ensuring that the cleaning crew had left no trace of their presence. As he walked to his car in the empty parking garage, he allowed himself a small smile. Thursday was 3 days away, and he finally had everything he needed to move to the next phase of his operation. Wednesday evening brought an unusual flurry of activity to the 42nd floor. Marcus arrived for his shift to find the 5 executives already in the conference room, their meeting more intense than usual. Through the glass walls, he could see papers spread across the table, laptops open, the kind of focused energy that suggested final preparations for something significant. Marcus settled into his routine with practiced ease, checking security systems and monitoring the building's access points. But tonight, his attention was sharper than usual. After 3 years of watching and waiting, he could feel the culmination of his patient work approaching like a gathering storm. Torres was the first to leave the meeting, his nervous energy more pronounced than usual as he hurried toward the elevators. As he passed Marcus's desk, he paused, seemingly on impulse. "Marcus, I need to ask you a favor," Torres said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to having his requests fulfilled without question. Marcus looked up from his console with the appropriate level of attention. "Of course, Mr. Torres. What can I do for you?" "Tomorrow evening, we're expecting a private delivery. Very important client, very sensitive materials. I need you to ensure that it's handled discreetly, no unnecessary questions, no detailed logs. Can I count on you?" Marcus nodded solemnly. "Absolutely, sir. I understand the importance of client confidentiality." Torres smiled, apparently satisfied. "I knew I could count on you. You've been such a reliable part of our team." He paused, pulling out his wallet. "Here's a little something for your discretion." He placed several $100 bills on Marcus's desk. Marcus looked at the money for a moment before carefully pushing it back toward Torres. "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Torres, but I'm just doing my job. Keeping this building secure and protecting our clients' privacy is what I'm paid for." Torres seemed surprised by the refusal, then impressed. "Exactly the kind of integrity we need around here, Marcus. Thank you." As Torres walked away, Marcus reflected on the irony of the situation. Torres was praising his integrity while asking him to participate in what was almost certainly illegal activity. The money had been a test, and by refusing it, Marcus had only reinforced Torres's confidence in his reliability. An hour later, Chen emerged from the conference room with a similar request. this time emphasizing the importance of ensuring that the loading dock security cameras experienced a convenient malfunction during the delivery window. Marcus listened with the appropriate level of concern, nodding at the right moments and asking practical questions about timing and procedures. "The thing is, Marcus," Chen explained with the practiced ease of someone experienced in justifying questionable decisions, "sometimes technology fails at the most inconvenient moments. Tomorrow night, between 9 and 11, I suspect we might experience some technical difficulties with our surveillance system." Marcus frowned thoughtfully. "I'd hate for that to happen, Mr. Chen. Our security is so important. But these systems are getting older, and we have been having some intermittent issues lately." "Exactly," Chen said, pleased with Marcus's understanding. "These things happen. The important thing is that we handle our clients' delivery professionally, regardless of any technical issues we might experience." As Chen walked away, Marcus made a note in his security log about the predicted system malfunction. From an outside perspective, it would appear that he was simply documenting a technical concern. In reality, he was creating a paper trail that would later prove the premeditated nature of the security breach. By the time the last executive left the building that night, Marcus had received similar requests from all 5 men. Each approached the conversation differently. Torres had tried direct bribery. Chen had opted for euphemistic language. Manning had cited legal precedents for client confidentiality. Hayes had emphasized company loyalty, and Blackstone had simply assumed compliance based on Marcus's track record. All of them had made the same fundamental error. They had assumed that Marcus was exactly who he appeared to be. Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of night where the city seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Marcus arrived at Meridian Tower earlier than usual, ostensibly to ensure that all systems were functioning properly before the important delivery. In reality, he was conducting final checks on equipment that had nothing to do with building security. The 5 executives were gathered in their usual conference room. But their demeanor was different tonight. The nervous energy of preparation had been replaced by the focused intensity of execution. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see them checking their phones obsessively, glancing at their watches and speaking in the clipped tones of people. Under pressure, at 8:30, Marcus received a call from the building's loading dock security desk. "This is Jim at the loading bay. I've got a truck here for a special delivery to the 42nd floor." Marcus consulted his clipboard with practiced efficiency. "I'll need to see the paperwork and verify the delivery with upstairs." "Actually," the driver's voice crackled through the intercom, "I was told to speak directly to someone named Torres about the security protocols." Marcus nodded to himself. "Right on schedule. I'll contact Mr. Torres immediately." Within minutes, Torres was striding toward the elevators, his usual nervous energy amplified by the importance of the moment. As he passed Marcus's desk, he paused. "Shh. Delivery we discussed is here," Torres said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm going down to oversee the logistics personally." Marcus nodded. "Should I prepare the freight elevator for special handling?" "That would be perfect." "And Marcus, remember what we discussed about the security cameras?" Marcus glanced at his console with a look of mild concern. "Actually, Mr. Torres, I've been having some technical issues with the loading dock surveillance all day. The system keeps cycling off and on. I was planning to call for a service technician tomorrow." Torres's relief was palpable. "Ow. Don't worry about it tonight. These systems fail at the worst possible times. Just focus on keeping the rest of the building secure." As Torres headed down to the loading dock, Marcus made several discreet adjustments to his security console. To any casual observer, he appeared to be troubleshooting technical problems. In reality, he was ensuring that every angle of the loading dock was being recorded by backup systems that the executives didn't know existed. 20 minutes later, Torres returned with 3 men in maintenance uniforms, pushing a series of unmarked crates on hand trucks. The group moved with the efficient purpose of people executing a well-rehearsed plan. As they waited for the freight elevator, Marcus could hear Torres providing quiet instructions about handling and placement. "Room 4247, Torres was saying to the lead maintenance worker. "Everything goes directly into the secure storage area. No intermediate stops, no documentation beyond what we've already provided." The maintenance worker nodded. "Understood."
Out.
In and out. No traces. Marcus observed the exchange with the passive attention of someone monitoring routine building operations. But his trained eye was cataloging details that would be crucial later, the dimensions of the crates. The apparent weight based on how many men were needed to move them, particular care being taken to avoid any marking or labeling as the group disappeared into the freight elevator. Marcus made a routine entry in his security log. 9:15 p.m. to maintenance delivery to 42nd floor. Authorized by Torres. Technical issues with loading dock cameras documented for service call. To anyone reviewing the log later, it would appear that Marcus had simply documented a routine delivery and noted a technical problem that had prevented proper surveillance. The beauty of the deception lay in its simplicity. Every element could be explained away as either routine business or technical failure. But Marcus knew something the executives didn't. The technical failure it requested was only affecting the cameras they knew about. By 10:30, the mysterious delivery had been completed and the maintenance crew had departed, leaving no evidence of their presence beyond some scuff marks on the loading dock floor. The 5 executives reconvened in their conference room, their body language suggesting a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see them shaking hands and exchanging the kind of smiles that accompany successful completion of profitable ventures. Marcus maintained his position at the security desk, performing his routine duties with the same steady competence he had demonstrated every night for 3 years. But tonight was different in ways the executives couldn't imagine. Tonight, Marcus was preparing to transition from observer to actor, from security guard to federal agent. At 11 o'clock, as Marcus was beginning his end-of-shift procedures, the building's main elevator chimed softly. The doors opened to reveal 3 individuals in dark suits, their bearing and purposeful stride immediately marking them as law enforcement. The leader, a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair, approached Marcus's desk with the confident gait of someone accustomed to having her authority recognized. "Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI," she said, displaying her credentials with practiced efficiency. "We need to speak with the building's security supervisor." Marcus looked up from his console with the appropriate level of surprise and concern. "I'm the senior security officer on duty tonight. Is there some kind of problem?" Agent Chen glanced at her colleagues before responding. "We have a federal warrant to inspect certain areas of this building and interview specific individuals. We'll need your cooperation to ensure this proceeds smoothly." Marcus nodded solemnly. "Of course. Whatever you need." "Should I notify building management?" "That won't be necessary just yet," Agent Chen replied. "First, we need to secure certain areas and review your security footage from this evening." As Marcus led the agents toward the security office, he could see through the conference room's glass walls that the executives had noticed the newcomers. Their relaxed postures had evaporated, replaced by the tense alertness of prey animals sensing predators. In the security office, Agent Chen and her team began what appeared to be a routine examination of the building's surveillance systems. Provided access codes and technical information with the helpful efficiency of a cooperative witness. But as the agents worked, subtle glances and nods passed between them, a silent communication that suggested deeper coordination. "Mr. Coleman," Agent Chen said as her team reviewed the evening's footage, "we need to ask you some questions about activities on the 42nd floor tonight." Marcus sat across from her with the careful attention of someone who understood the seriousness of federal investigation. "I'll help however I can, Agent Chen." "Can you tell us about any unusual deliveries or activities you observed this evening?"
Marcus
consulted his security log with practiced thoroughness. "Well, there was a maintenance delivery around 9:15. Mr. Torres from the executive floor authorized it personally. Some kind of equipment for their secure storage area." Agent Chen made notes as Marcus spoke. "Did you observe the delivery personally?" "I saw the crew bring the materials up in the freight elevator," Marcus replied. "But I'm afraid our loading dock cameras were experiencing technical difficulties tonight. I was planning to call for service tomorrow." One of the other agents looked up from the surveillance console. "Sir, I'm not seeing any record of system malfunctions in the technical logs." Marcus frowned thoughtfully. "That's odd. I was having intermittent issues all evening. The display kept cycling on and off." He paused, as if a thought had just occurred to him. "You don't think someone might have tampered with the system, do you?" Agent Chen exchanged glances with her. "Colleagues, Mr. Coleman, I need you to understand that this is now part of an active federal investigation. Everything you tell us is being recorded and may be used in legal proceedings." Marcus nodded gravely. "I understand completely. I want to cooperate fully." "Good. Now, I need to ask you about your background and qualifications for this position." Marcus straightened slightly. "I've been with Meridian for 3 years. Before that, I worked for the government in various security-related positions. My references and background checks should be in my employment file." Agent Chen consulted a folder she had brought with her. "According to our records, Marcus Coleman retired from the Federal Bureau of Investigation after 28 years of service specializing in white-collar crime and corporate fraud investigations." The temperature in the room seemed to drop as the implications of her words sank in. Marcus met her gaze steadily, his expression shifting subtly from helpful cooperation to professional recognition. "Agent Chen," he said quietly, "I believe it's time we discussed why I'm really here." The silence in the security office stretched for several heartbeats as the full implications of Marcus's identity settled over the room. Agent Chen leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from investigative authority to professional. "Respect. Agent Marcus Coleman," she said formally, "Bureau ID 2847, assigned to the Economic Crimes Division under Director Patterson. Your undercover assignment began 3 years, 2 months, and 15 days ago." Marcus nodded, his own demeanor transforming as he dropped the careful subservience that had defined his security guard persona. When he spoke again, his voice carried the measured authority of someone accustomed to briefing federal prosecutors on complex criminal conspiracies. "Operation Silent Watch," he said, consulting a small notebook he had retrieved from a locked drawer in the security desk. "Primary targets: Richard Blackstone, Jonathan Hayes, Michael Torres, David Chin, and Robert Manning. Suspected crimes include money laundering, foreign bribery, procurement, fraud, and violation of multiple federal trade regulations." Agent Chen smiled grimly. "And tonight's delivery?" Marcus gestured toward the surveillance console. "Crates containing approximately $40 million in illegal payments from transnational industries to secure exclusive contracts with the Department of Defense. The payments were structured to appear as legitimate equipment purchases, but the actual materials are worthless counterfeits." One of the other agents whistled softly. "$40 million. That's just tonight's shipment," Marcus replied. "Based on my surveillance over the past 3 years, I estimate the total conspiracy involves somewhere between $200 and $300 million in illegal payments and fraudulent contracts." Agent Chen stood, her team immediately moving into action around her. "Agent Coleman, are the targets still in the building?" Marcus checked his console. "Conference room 4251. They've been in there for the past hour, presumably celebrating the successful completion of tonight's transaction." Security situation: the building is essentially empty except for our targets and the cleaning crew on floors 1 through 15. I've maintained complete surveillance on all access points. No one has left the 42nd floor since the delivery was completed. Agent Chen nodded to her colleagues, who immediately began speaking into their communication devices, coordinating with teams positioned outside the building. Within minutes, the Meridian Tower would be surrounded by federal agents, ensuring that no one involved in the conspiracy could escape. "Agent Coleman," Agent Chen said as her team prepared for the arrests, "I have to ask 3 years undercover in the same location, maintaining the same cover identity. That's an unusual commitment for a single investigation." Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. "These men weren't just stealing money. Agent Chen, their fraudulent defense contracts were putting American soldiers at risk. Equipment that was supposed to protect our troops in combat zones was being replaced with substandard materials that could fail at critical moments. This wasn't just about financial crimes. It was about national security." It's the weight of his words settled over the room as the agents prepared for what would be one of the largest corporate fraud arrests in recent federal history. Marcus had spent 3 years watching, listening, documenting every aspect of a conspiracy that had enriched 5 men while potentially endangering the lives of American service members. The irony, Marcus continued as they prepared to leave the security office, is that they actually trusted me more than they trusted each other. Each of them thought he was the smartest person in the room, convinced that his own particular area of expertise made him indispensable to the group. None of them ever considered that the quiet security guard might be the most dangerous person. On the 42nd floor, Agent Chen checked her weapon and communication device. Ready for this? Marcus straightened his security uniform one final time. I've been ready for 3 years. The walk from the security office to conference room 4251 felt both endless and instantaneous. Marcus led the way, his keycard providing silent access through the building's security checkpoints, while Agent Chen and her team moved with the practiced efficiency of federal agents executing a carefully planned operation through the glass walls of the conference room. The 5 executives were visible in their moment of triumph. Blackstone was pouring champagne into crystal glasses. Hayes was laughing at something Torres had said, and Chen and Manning were examining documents that presumably detailed their successful transaction. They looked like what they had always believed themselves to be: successful businessmen who had mastered the art of profitable ventures through superior intelligence and strategic thinking. Marcus paused outside the conference room door, his hand resting on the handle as he turned to Agent Chen. After tonight, they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to figure out how they missed the signs. The truth is, there weren't any signs to miss. I wasn't hiding who I was being exactly who I needed to be. Agent Chen nodded. Her team, positioned strategically around the hallway. Agent Coleman, you have the honor. Marcus opened the door and stepped into the conference room with the same measured pace he had used during 3 years of routine security rounds. The executives looked up with mild curiosity, their expressions shifting from celebration to confusion as they recognized their familiar security guard entering their private meeting. Gentlemen, Marcus said, his voice carrying a new tone of authority that none of them had heard before, I need to interrupt your celebration. Blackstone frowned, setting down his champagne glass. Marcus, what are you doing here? This is a private meeting. I understand, Marcus replied calmly. That's exactly why I'm here. As Agent Chen and her team entered the room behind Marcus, their FBI credentials clearly visible, the executive's confusion transformed into something approaching panic. Hayes knocked over his champagne glass as he reached for his phone. Torres stumbled backward against the conference table, and Manning's legal training kicked in as he immediately began calculating the implications of federal agents in their private meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, Agent Chen announced, her voice cutting through the sudden chaos. I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and violation of federal procurement regulations. The next few moments unfolded with the surreal quality of a carefully choreographed performance. As Agent Chen read them their rights, the executive's eyes darted frantically between the federal agents and Marcus, trying to process the impossible. The reality that their trusted security guard had apparently summoned the FBI to their private meeting. Marcus, Chen said, his voice barely above a whisper, what's happening here? Why are you? Marcus met his gaze steadily. My name is Agent Marcus Coleman, Federal Bureau of Investigation. For the past 3 years, I've been conducting an undercover investigation into your criminal conspiracy. The silence that followed was deafening. Hayes collapsed into his chair as if his legs could no longer support him. Torres began muttering something about lawyers and constitutional rights. Manning stared at Marcus with the kind of horrified fascination reserved for watching one's entire world collapse in real time. Blackstone, apparently operating on pure adrenaline and denial, stepped forward aggressively. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly have any evidence of wrongdoing. We're legitimate businessmen conducting legitimate business. Marcus consulted the same small notebook he had shown Agent Chen earlier. Mr. Blackstone, over the past 3 years, I've documented 147 separate instances of criminal activity, recorded over 600 hours of incriminating conversations, and photographed evidence of conspiracy involving 43 separate fraudulent transactions. He looked up from his notes, meeting Blackstone's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had spent 3 years waiting for this moment. Tonight's delivery of counterfeit defense equipment represents the culmination of a criminal enterprise that has defrauded the United States government of approximately $270 million. Manning found his voice first, his legal training providing him with something to focus on besides the catastrophic reality of their situation. We demand to speak with our attorneys immediately.
Us.
This entire operation is an entrapment scheme that will never hold up in court. Marcus smiled faintly. Mr. Manning, as an attorney, you should understand the legal definition of entrapment. I never encouraged, suggested, or participated in any of your criminal activities. I simply observed and documented them as they occurred naturally. Chen gestured to her team, who began placing handcuffs on the executives with professional efficiency. Gentlemen, you'll have ample opportunity to discuss legal strategies with your attorneys. Right now, you're coming with us. As the federal agents led the 5 men toward the elevators, Marcus remained in the conference room, methodically photographing the documents they had left behind and ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly secured. After 3 years of careful observation, he wasn't about to let any detail escape documentation. The Meridian Tower's 42nd floor buzzed with controlled federal activity as evidence. Technicians cataloged every document, computer file, and piece of equipment in the executive offices. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of transitioning from undercover observer to key witness and evidence coordinator, helping Agent Chen's team navigate the complex web of financial records and criminal documentation he had been tracking. For 3 years, in the secure storage area where Torres had directed the evening's delivery, FBI technicians carefully opened each of the 27 crates that had been delivered just hours earlier. The contents confirmed Marcus's assessment: sophisticated-looking equipment that appeared to meet military specifications, but was actually composed of substandard materials that would fail under combat conditions. Agent Coleman, one of the technicians, called out, "These circuit boards are impressive forgeries, but the actual components are consumer-grade electronics." If this equipment had been deployed in the field, Marcus nodded grimly, American soldiers would have died because their communication. Equipment failed at critical moments. That's what made this case personal for me. Agent Chen approached with a stack of financial documents. The preliminary review suggests your estimates were conservative. We're looking at closer to $400 million in fraudulent contracts. Over the past 5 years, the conspiracy predates my investigation, Marcus confirmed. I was brought in when the Bureau started receiving anonymous tips about defense contract irregularities. It took 6 months of preparation before I could infiltrate their operation as a security guard. As they worked through the evidence, Agent Chen asked the question that had been nagging at her since the arrests. Agent Coleman, 3 years, is an extraordinarily long undercover assignment. Most operations of this type are concluded within 18 months. What kept you here so long? Marcus paused in his documentation, considering how to explain the complexity of the case he had been building. Agent Chen, these 5 men weren't just criminals. They were sophisticated criminals with legal expertise, political connections, and legitimate business operations that provided cover for their illegal activities. Building a case that would survive their inevitable legal challenges required more than just evidence of criminal activity. It required understanding every aspect of their operation, every relationship, every financial structure they had created to hide their crimes. He gestured toward the crates of counterfeit equipment. More importantly, they weren't just stealing money. They were creating a systematic vulnerability in our national defense infrastructure. Every day I delayed the arrest was another day they could potentially supply defective equipment to military operations. But every day I gathered more evidence was another guarantee that when we finally moved against them, they wouldn't be able to buy their way out of the consequences. Agent Chen nodded, understanding the weight of the decision Marcus had carried for 3 years. The moral calculus of long-term undercover work, exactly, and there was something else. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. These men had gotten away with similar schemes before. Smaller operations, less sophisticated, but they had developed a sense of invincibility. They believed that their intelligence, their connections, and their legitimate business success made them untouchable. I needed to build a case so comprehensive that their arrogance would become their downfall. As if summoned by their conversation, Agent Chen's phone buzzed with a message. She read it quickly, then looked up with satisfaction. The 5 suspects are being processed downtown. Initial interviews suggest that each one is blaming the others and claiming he was a reluctant participant in someone else's scheme. Marcus smiled. That's exactly what I expected. For 3 years, I watched them collaborate successfully because they thought they were smarter than everyone else. Now that they're facing federal prison, they'll discover that criminals rarely maintain loyalty when the stakes get personal. Throughout the night, as the federal investigation team continued their work, Marcus provided detailed briefings on each suspect's role in the conspiracy, their individual psychological profiles, and the specific evidence that linked them to particular crimes. His 3 years of observation had given him an almost encyclopedic knowledge of their operation, and his federal training allowed him to present that knowledge in the precise format that prosecutors would need to build their cases. By dawn, Meridian Tower's executive floor had been transformed from a corporate power center into a crime scene meticulously documented by federal investigators. As Marcus finally prepared to leave the building where he had spent 3 years in disguise, Agent Chen approached him with a question. Agent Coleman, looking back on this operation, do you think they ever suspected you? Marcus considered the question as he looked around the empty offices where 5 men had planned crimes while assuming they were unobserved. Agent Chen, I think they forgot I existed. And that was exactly what I needed them to do. 6 months after the arrests at Meridian Tower, Marcus Coleman sat in a federal courtroom watching as the final defendant in the conspiracy case received his sentence. The trials had been swift and decisive, aided by the overwhelming evidence he had gathered during his 3-year undercover operation and the defendants' mutual recriminations once they realized the extent of their legal peril. Richard Blackstone, the ringleader who had coordinated the financial aspects of the conspiracy, received 28 years in federal prison. Jonathan Hayes, whose nervous energy had always suggested he knew he was participating in something illegal, received 18 years after cooperating with prosecutors. Michael Torres, who had tried to bribe Marcus on the night of his arrest, received 22 years. David Chen, whose procurement expertise had been essential to the conspiracy's success, received 25 years. Robert Manning, the attorney who had provided legal cover for the operation, received 30 years and was disbarred. The sentences reflected not just the scale of their financial crimes, but the potential consequences of their actions for national security. During the trials, Pentagon officials testified about the catastrophic results that could have occurred if the defective equipment had been deployed in combat zones. As Marcus watched the final sentencing, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years of patient observation of maintaining a facade so complete that he had almost forgotten who he was beneath the security guard uniform had culminated in justice for crimes that could have cost American lives. Agent Chen, who had become his liaison with the prosecution team, approached him as the courtroom emptied. Agent Coleman, I have to ask, was it worth it? 3 years of your life, 3 years of maintaining a false identity, all for this moment? Marcus considered the question as he watched the 5 defendants being led away in handcuffs for the final time. Agent Chen, when I started this operation, I thought I was investigating financial crimes. It wasn't until I understood the scope of their conspiracy that I realized I was potentially preventing a national security disaster. He paused, gathering his thoughts. For 3 years, I watched these men prioritize their personal wealth over the safety of American soldiers. They laughed about the money they were making while selling equipment that could have failed when troops needed it most. So yes, it was worth it. The media attention surrounding the case had been intense, with headlines about the security guard, spy, and the Meridian conspiracy dominating news cycles for weeks. Marcus had testified in each trial, his detailed observations and meticulous documentation providing prosecutors with the evidence they needed to secure convictions on every charge. But perhaps the most satisfying moment had come during Blackstone's trial. When the defense attorney had attempted to portray Marcus as an agent provocateur who had entrapped innocent businessmen into criminal activity, Marcus's response had been simple and devastating. He had presented 3 years of security footage showing the defendants planning and executing their crimes without any input, suggestion, or encouragement from him. "Your Honor," he had testified, "I was a witness to their crimes, not a participant in them. My job was to observe and document, which I did. Their job, apparently, was to assume that security guards are invisible and unimportant. They were wrong about both." The defense's case had collapsed under the weight of evidence that showed Marcus had been a passive observer of crimes that were planned and executed entirely by the defendants themselves. Now, as the legal proceedings finally concluded, Marcus faced the question of what came next. His undercover identity had been so complete that returning to normal FBI operations felt almost disorienting. For 3 years, he had been Marcus Coleman, the security guard, a man whose greatest responsibility was ensuring that office doors were locked at night. Transitioning back to Marcus Coleman, the federal agent, someone whose decisions could affect national security investigations, required a mental adjustment that couldn't be rushed. "Agent Coleman," Agent Chen said as they left the courthouse, "the Bureau has been reviewing your performance during this operation. 3 years undercover, no psychological support, no partner contact.
While maintaining
Perfect operational security. It's almost unprecedented." Marcus smiled faintly. "It helped that I genuinely enjoyed the work. There's something peaceful about night security. You have time to think, to observe, to understand the patterns that people don't realize they're creating. Speaking of which, I have a message from Director Patterson. He wants to discuss your next assignment." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Next assignment? Apparently your success with long-term undercover operations has gotten attention at the highest levels. There are other cases, other situations where someone with your particular skills could be valuable." As they walked toward the federal building, Marcus considered the implications. 3 years at Meridian Tower had taught him that the most effective investigations often happened in plain sight, conducted by people who were so ordinary that they became invisible. There were certainly other situations where a patient observer with federal training could uncover crimes that more obvious investigative techniques might miss. "Agent Chen," he said finally, "ask Director Patterson if he has any openings for janitors, maintenance workers, or parking attendants. I seem to have developed a talent for being overlooked." Agent Chen laughed. "I'll make sure he gets the message." 1 year after the Meridian Tower arrests, Marcus Coleman stood before a packed auditorium at the FBI National Academy, delivering a lecture on long-term undercover operations to a class of new agents. The case had become legendary within federal law enforcement circles, not just for its success, but for the innovative approach that had made that success possible. The fundamental principle of deep undercover work, Marcus told his audience, is not to become someone else, but to become the version of yourself that the situation requires. For 3 years, I wasn't pretending to be a security guard. I was being a security guard who happened to be a federal agent. A young agent in the front row raised her hand. "Agent Coleman, how did you maintain your psychological stability during such an extended operation? 3 years of isolation from your actual identity seems like it would be incredibly challenging." Marcus smiled, appreciating the thoughtfulness of the question. "That's an excellent question, and it gets to the heart of what I learned during this operation. I wasn't isolated from my identity. I was using my identity in a different way. Every skill I had developed as a federal agent, every instinct I had learned through years of investigation was being applied to my work as a security guard. I was still doing the same job, gathering evidence, analyzing criminal behavior, building cases against people who broke federal law. I was just doing it from a different position," another agent asked. "What was the most challenging aspect of the operation?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "The most challenging aspect was maintaining patience. For 3 years, I watched these men commit crimes, while knowing that each day I delayed action was another day they could potentially cause harm. The temptation to move quickly, to make arrests as soon as I had sufficient evidence, was enormous. But building a case that would survive their inevitable legal challenges required patience and comprehensive documentation. He paused, looking out at the eager faces of the new agents. But the most rewarding aspect was realizing that sometimes the most effective way to see the truth is to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to let people reveal their true nature, because they don't think anyone important is watching. After the lecture, Marcus was approached by Director Patterson, who had overseen the Meridian investigation from its inception. "Agent Coleman, excellent presentation. You've given these new agents a perspective on undercover work that they won't get from textbooks." "Thank you, Director. It's important for them to understand that effective investigation isn't always about dramatic confrontations or high-tech surveillance. Sometimes it's about being in the right place, at the right time, with the right skills, and the patience, too. Use them." Director Patterson nodded. "Speaking of which, I have a proposition for you. I've identified several other situations that could benefit from your particular approach to long-term observation. Interested in discussing your next assignment?"
Us? Marcus?
Smiled, already feeling the familiar stirring of anticipation that preceded a new investigation. "What did you have in mind?" "There's a high-end art gallery in New York that we suspect is being used to launder money for organized crime. They're looking for a night security guard." As they walked toward the director's office to discuss the details of the new operation, Marcus reflected on the lesson that the Meridian case had taught him about human nature. People revealed their true selves when they believed they were unobserved. When they thought the only witnesses were individuals they considered insignificant or powerless. The 5 executives at Meridian Tower made the fundamental error of assuming that their security guard was exactly what he appeared to be, no more, no less. They had forgotten that every person has depths beneath their surface, that titles and uniforms don't define capabilities, and that the most dangerous investigations often happen when the investigator is hiding in plain sight. "Director Patterson," Marcus said as they reached the elevator, "there's something I want to make sure the new agents understand about the Meridian case." "What's that?" It wasn't about me being cleverer than the suspects or about superior investigative techniques. It was about understanding that people see what they expect to see. The executives at Meridian expected to see a simple security guard. So that's all they saw. They never looked deeper, never questioned their assumptions, never considered that the 8th person in their meetings might be the most dangerous one there. Director Patterson smiled. "The 8th story." "Exactly. Sometimes the most important story is the one that's hiding in plain sight, told by the person everyone overlooks. In this case, their assumptions about who I was became the foundation for their downfall." As the elevator doors closed and they headed toward the next chapter of Marcus's career, he carried with him the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served not through dramatic confrontation or sophisticated technology, but through the simple power of patient observation and the willingness to be underestimated. The 8th story, Marcus had learned, was often the most powerful one of all because it was the story that revealed the truth about everyone else in the room, and that truth, once revealed, changed everything. This story reminds us that we never truly know the people around us. The security guard watching our building, the janitor cleaning our offices, the server bringing our coffee. Behind every uniform is a person with their own story, their own skills, and their own purpose. Sometimes the most important investigations happen when we least expect them, conducted by people we never suspect. The 8th story is always there, waiting to be discovered by those who understand that truth has a way of emerging when people think no one important is watching. Justice doesn't always announce itself with sirens and dramatic arrests. Sometimes it waits patiently at a security desk, gathering evidence one conversation at a time. If this story resonated with you, remember to subscribe to the 8th story for more tales that reveal the hidden depths beneath ordinary surfaces. Turn on notifications because you never know when the next 8th story will unfold, reminding us that everyone we meet might be more than they appear to be. Thanks for joining me on this journey to the shadows where justice wears a uniform, and patience becomes the most powerful weapon of all. I'll see you in the next 8th story, where once again we'll discover that the most important truths often hide in the most unexpected places.